Hey everyone, before we start, I know this is a bit late and there's a few reasons for that, unfortunately. Uh, if you know anything about what's happened to the upper Midwest over the last week, you know that we basically got hit with two really, really big snowstorms back to back. Literally it was one day and then just right over into the next day another one showed up and wrought a lot of havoc, as you're seeing in some of these pictures right now. In fact, at this point, I'm going to show you one that goes into what happened into the stairwell that leads to the door that's right over here, my basement door. Yeah, you can see that thing was almost entirely full of snow, everything everywhere. Here's the window. This is what the view out that looks like. Here's the view out of another basement window in my bedroom. And this is the one that's in my bathroom. So yeah, you can see just how much snow piled up so quickly. And that, obviously took a lot of my time up. And added to that, when I tried to get things done, the scanner function on my printer completely went on the fritz, and I had to start and restart it on several occasions, and that took up almost 2 to 3 days worth of activity as well. So yeah, that's why this is probably, I don't know if this is coming up Sunday or Monday, but yeah, it's definitely late, and I just wanted to apologize. Like, I have reasons, but, again, it's just everything got out of hand. So, let's go on and start the episode proper. This is kind of hard, as the Phantom Stranger is a character whose background is so mysterious that he really doesn't have a background so much. At one point, DC's New 52 universe tried to intimate that he was Judas Iscariot, and that was about it. And in recent years, DC has tried to distance themselves from the New 52, so I don't know how much that part of the story applies anymore. In terms of publication, The Phantom Stranger appeared in a 6-issue anthology series in 1952. The series followed the Stranger as he traveled around offering mystical assistance to those in need. From there, he would occasionally move on to popping up in other heroes' books to help them out, even being offered a membership in the Justice League, only for the Stranger to disappear before the offer could actually be presented to him. Though if the Phantom Stranger is really known for much of anything, it's probably the idea that writer Neil Gaiman had 2 pitches for the character rejected by DC, which he would slowly eventually rework into his landmark series, The Sandman. However, before any of that happened, The Phantom Stranger would be revived as a series in 1969. There was just one little problem. The stories of the Stranger just popping up and helping random people could get really repetitive real fast. Not to mention, it's not particularly deep storytelling. Thankfully, DC hit on the idea where they would revive another obscure character from a 1950s anthology series. That character would be Dr. Terrence 13, the world's greatest skeptic, who would travel the world debunking various hauntings, curses, and the like. The reason behind this was the fact that many of Dr. 13's ancestors were in fact prolific scientists who would eventually be betrayed by their villagers and killed under suspected witchcraft. Being that both he and the Phantom Stranger are effectively good guys, Dr. 13 would act less as an enemy and more like an antagonistic foil to the Phantom Stranger. Dr. 13 was just hell-bent on finding logical conclusions to the various mystical circumstances that he and the Phantom Stranger would find themselves in. Though if the name 13 sounds familiar to you, it could be because you're familiar with his daughter Tracy 13, who, much to her father's chagrin, is one of the DC Universe's most proficient magic users. She's also a primary love interest for the Jaime Reyes Blue Beetle and Natasha Irons, niece of the Superman supporting character Steel. The Phantom Stranger series would run for 7 years and build up a small cult following, including, obviously, Neil Gaiman. Then, in 2006, DC Comics began collecting the Phantom Stranger series in their phone book format called DC Showcase after another old anthology series. A phone book, as you may recall, is a cheap black and white reprinting of a comic, usually a large bundle of which, over 500 pages usually. And that's what we're looking at today, so buckle up as we're covering the first 21 issues of DC Showcase presenting The Phantom Stranger. A group of young boys, apparently acting on some type of collective dare, sneak out to spend the night in a supposedly cursed cave. It doesn't take long for them to be put on edge as a strange shadow scurries along the wall. It's then that a mysterious figure who calls himself the Phantom Stranger appears to point out that the curse was just a spider. The stranger knows something about real curses as he begins to tell the youths a small tale of a previous experience. In New York City, a man named Mark Davis was walking through Columbus Circle when he noticed a small gathering in the Park Center. A man was showing off a group of symbols and stating that the fall of the moon was going to bring down all mankind. Mark began scribbling the symbols on a piece of paper, angering the cult leader who had several lackeys accost Mark on his way home. It was only through the intervention of the Phantom Stranger that Mark was saved. Mark and the stranger then began working together to decipher the symbols, which led to various points throughout all of New York City. From there, they lay a plan where Mark would allow himself to be taken hostage and brought back to the cult leader, and the stranger would then follow along so he could jump the cult leader and take them down with relative ease while Mark ran out to get the cops. However, when Mark returned with the authorities, the stranger was gone, leaving only the unconscious cult members behind. Much like in his story, the Phantom Stranger soon vanishes into thin air, and the boys find themselves meeting a new person who's entered the cave, Dr. Terrence 13, and he knows curses aren't real. There's a perfectly logical explanation for everything, and he should know it's in his blood. I hope you don't mind, we're just going to skip over this bit as it's basically just a recap of Dr. 13's origin story, which we already covered during the preamble. Returning to the present of 1969, the stranger returns as Dr. 13 is bringing the boys home. Their confrontation is interrupted by the sudden appearance of a large beast flying through the late-night sky. Both men are able to quickly deduce that it's just a prop plane being used to distract everyone to allow several local banks to be broken into. The stranger teleports onto the beast to take out the pilots, while Dr. 13 takes down the bank robbers. Afterwards, though, the stranger vanishes again, leaving Dr. 13 to swear the exposed stranger for the charlatan that he is. The Phantom Stranger has other business to attend to as a plane crashes, killing all on board, including 3 prominent passengers: recently engaged businessman John Morton, another businessman named Carson Rand, and rodeo star named Bart Barron. 2 nights later, Rand's ex-business partner turned blackmailer Edgar Jones is visiting someone claiming to be the ghost of Carson Rand and demanding that the blackmail papers be turned over to him. The ghost is thwarted by the sudden appearance of the Phantom Stranger, who points out that ghosts don't normally walk through the door. A few days later, a similar scenario plays out at a ranch where the spirit of Bart Barron demands to ride a new saddle bronc. Once more, though, the stranger debunks this by pointing out that the messages that Barron has been leaving were clearly carved out using chemicals and not any spiritual abilities. That just leaves one person, John Martin's fiancée, Margot Phillips. She gets visited by John's ghost, promising that the two will be together forever. It's then that the Phantom Stranger pops out and rips off the man's mask, revealing it to be a co-worker of Margot's that she had caught stealing company funds. He was planning to kill Margot and then use some of the dug-up information on Rand and Barron to throw the authorities off the scent. Margot then notices the Phantom Stranger in the background of a photo of all 3 men playing cards on their fatal plane crash, but before she can bring it up, the stranger has vanished once more. Meanwhile, Dr. 13 and his wife Maria are in the Chinatown district of San Francisco visiting old college friends. The reunion is short-lived as the apartment building is rocked by an explosion reportedly caused by a dragon. Marie tends to the now orphaned son of their friends, while Dr. 13 begins tracking down any information on the chief suspect, a local crime lord named Shanghai Fu. Apologies to any Chinese viewers out there for the cringy portrayal of your nationality. If it helps, you're not the only one to get portrayed like this, and yeah, it was unfortunately still acceptable in 1969 to do things like this. Dr. 13 receives an unlikely assist from the Phantom Stranger as he tracks down Ching and gets him to admit that the bombings are designed to ward off any urban gentrification. Though the two work together to bring Chin down, Dr. 13 shows absolutely no gratitude to the Phantom Stranger, who vanishes once again, leaving the good doctor to stew in his juices even further. From there, we meet Cyrus Hatton and his son Billy. Cyrus heads off to work, only for his car to suddenly crash into a wall, with Billy looking on as it bursts into flames. The Phantom Stranger comforts Billy until Cyrus suddenly walks into the family home, claiming to have 9 lives. This reminded the Phantom Stranger of a story about a motorist named Neil Hunter, who was led to a mysterious mansion by a man who liked to trap wayward motorists and kill them. The Phantom Stranger came to Neil's aid, and they halted the killer soon thereafter. That story doesn't seem related to this at all. There's little comfort for the Hattons, though, as Cyrus soon throws himself off a bridge, only to return unharmed once more. This attracts the attention of Dr. 13, who points out that in a past occurrence, he can explain everything. It involved an ancient Egyptian queen named Tutika, who supposedly came to life and drained men of their passions. She appeared to be putting the moves on Dr. 13, but he was onto her game and worked with Marie to thwart the con game that Tutika and her handlers were running.
The next day, when the dedication of a new monument goes awry and topples onto Cyrus, he has enough consciousness to explain that he was hypnotized by a man named Ramu, who was working with the local mafia to undermine building contracts.
That's not how hypnotism works. I mean, even if he did survive jumping off the bridge, he'd still have a bunch of broken bones and stuff like that.
Cyrus then begins working with both the Phantom Stranger and Dr. 13 to catch Ramu in the act and bring down the mafia long enough to go into witness protection. The Phantom Stranger then moves on to an abandoned amusement park where he tells a group of youths led by a boy named Jody how the park came to be in that state. It seemed that the park's fortune teller, Vasti, had been making eerily accurate predictions about rides malfunctioning. It was probably due to the fact that Vasti was sabotaging the rides in order to gain publicity. Vasti was arrested and wound up dying in prison later on. However, the rides have been malfunctioning again, leading to speculation that Vasti's ghost is haunting the park. To that end, Dr. 13 has been called in to investigate. After telling a story about a debunked haunting in Paris, Dr. 13 and the Phantom Stranger notice that Jody has mysteriously disappeared. The two reluctantly begin working together to navigate a booby trap-themed funhouse in order to find where Jody is being held hostage by what appears to be Vasti's ghost. But it turns out to not be the ghost of the long-dead fortune teller Vasti, as the rip-off his master reveal that it's actually park manager Jerry Cahill, who stood to gain $5 million in insurance payments if the park shut down.
Would have got away with it too if it hadn't been for you snooping kids!
Sorry, it was a little too hard to resist doing that. Anyway, let's move on to the next story, which introduces a recurring villain and apparently former romantic partner of the Phantom Stranger in the form of a demonic sorceress named Tala.
The 13s find themselves in Haiti witnessing a summoning ritual for Tala. Dr. 13 remains skeptical as a supposedly possessed individual dives into the ocean at the sorceress's command. The good doctor attempts to save the man, but to no avail. The next day, the couple heads back to the United States, where unbeknownst to them, Tala is hitching the ride. The Phantom Stranger appears on the plane to begin fighting the sorceress, and the whole thing whips up a massive storm. After the plane lands, Dr. 13 heads over to a supposedly possessed brownstone where he encounters a group of hippies squatting in there for their own possible enjoyment. The group, consisting of Attila, Mr. Square, Wild Rose, and Spartacus, have a book that claims to summon Tala. To prove their point, they begin reading from it and summoning Tala with the Phantom Stranger appearing in tow. A brief skirmish occurs once more, but then Tala disappears. Dr. 13 then turns up that the supposed ghost that was haunting the brownstone is actually an elderly woman who had been held up there ever since her father died.
Yeah, the extremely poor man's Scooby-Doo gang become recurring characters in the book for a while afterwards. I may have jumped the gun in using that Wayne's World clip.
The group are hanging out on a beach as a massive storm whips up from the Phantom Stranger and Tala duking it out once more. It's then that they spot an old man in surprisingly modern attire emerging from the waves. He collapses and apparently dies, but his body disappears when the group returns with help. Elsewhere, the 13s are dancing the night away at a local club. In the background, a woman named Vera is ghosted by her supposed boyfriend, Carl, the guy who's throwing the party. She storms out and tearfully drives away, only for her car to mysteriously careen off a bridge. The Phantom Stranger dives in to rescue Vera, but it's too late and she's dead, with a permanent tear resting on her cheek. Back at the club, Earl begins putting the moves on a newly arrived Wild Rose. Everything is soon interrupted by the sudden arrival of both Tala and the Phantom Stranger. The party clears out and heads back to Earl's beachside home. He resumes trying to woo Wild Rose, and the two begin walking along the beach, where it turns out he's actually a servant of Tala, who had resurrected him from a plane crash in the ocean a few years back. Each woman he wins over is sacrificed to her. Tala appears to drag Wild Rose out to sea, but the Phantom Stranger intervenes once more, pulling her back to safety and causing Tala to kill Earl instead.
I should point out that we are skipping over a couple of very minor backup stories that appear here, just because they don't involve any of the main characters. It's just the Phantom Stranger telling a story.
The group arrives at a bed and breakfast where they spot the employees being chased off by various flying objects. Both Dr. 13 and the Phantom Strangers who arrive to explain things via short stories. Dr. 13 tells a story about a family who believed that they were being stalked by a werewolf, only for it turned out to be a creepy incel luring after the family's teenage daughter. The stranger counters with a tale about a headless horseman, but not that headless horseman, terrorizing people in a nearby forest. The stranger was able to bring the horseman's spirit to peace by reuniting him with his head and his lost love. As for the haunted B&B, well, it just turns out that one of the owners summoned Tala to haunt the place because of ice cream. Yes, ice cream.
Yeah. Ice cream.
The group arrives at a small New England fishing village where they soon get caught in the middle of yet another fracas between the Phantom Stranger and Tala. Dr. 13 manages to rescue them, and he's in town to deal with a woman named Vanessa Vulcan, who feels that she's cursed due to several male suitors dying in a short period of time. The Phantom Stranger and Dr. 13 tell more stories, as it turns out that Vanessa was really being stalked by a childhood friend whose romantic advances she had rejected, named Nicholas. Nicholas would then go on to stage his death while then roping his father to help take out the other male suitors. From there, it's on to the Arctic Circle, where a major oil company's drilling seems to have reawakened a group of giant ice monsters that are now destroying the tanker ships. Dr. 13 is called in, noting the similarity between these and a murder that took place involving Freon in a hothouse. Before the 13s can investigate further, the Phantom Stranger appears to warn them away. Dr. 13 ignores the stranger, though Maria has her doubts. Soon, the couple's helicopter is taken down by what appears to be a giant ice sword. The ice monsters then knock out Dr. 13 and take Maria hostage for some reason, and it turns out the monsters are in league with Tala, who has awakened them to try to reclaim the surface as they had millennia earlier. However, the Phantom Stranger uses his telepathy to show how the world has changed since the monsters walked the earth and then went into hiding. That being said, they still intend to hold Maria hostage as a reminder until they free her like 5 minutes after that,
making the ice monster's whole venture completely pointless. Anyway, our next story involves more inappropriate stereotyping, so here's like 3 or 4 more apologies. I mean, it's going to happen a couple more times throughout this book.
The president of the African country of Africa, seriously, they don't give a country name, they just say Africa, has called in Dr. 13 to investigate a murder claimed to be from a tribal chief called Obeah-Man. It seems that this religion is known for sacrificing any enemy. In this case, it's the fact the president has been drilling for oil on sacred land. Added to that, there have been reports of a man who died years prior popping up to harass oil companies. Dr. 13 is able to follow up any possible mystical connections, as it turns out there was a recording device hidden in the president's office. Tensions then begin to increase as the Phantom Stranger and the hippies begin showing up as well. The group tracks down where Obeah-Man's followers are holding a ceremony, only to find that Tala has been masquerading as the deity. The Phantom Stranger appears to trap Tala in a sacred jar and throw it into a lake. Sometime later, a group of ladies at a bar are approached by a man named Tanarak, who manages to woo one of them named Lottie, who has just gone through a nasty breakup. Things appear to go well until Lottie suddenly collapses and dies out of nowhere. This attracts the attention of both Dr. 13 and the Phantom Stranger, who are at the club for some reason, as there have actually been several deaths of this kind reported in the area recently. Things go from bad to worse when one of the other women in Lottie's group, named Michelle, is then abducted by Tanarak.
Tanarak is a British alchemist obsessed with achieving immortality after a traumatic experience in Egypt. He was eventually able to halt his aging process. However, along the way, he wound up losing his wife Diana. And guess who he thinks Michelle is a dead ringer for?
Tamarak sets about trying to restore Diana's soul to Michelle's body until the Phantom Stranger appears, leading to a battle where the stranger shrugs off being exposed to the elixir of death. Eventually, Tamarak is tossed into a statue which topples on top of him. Dr. 13 arrives, but Tamarak's body is mysteriously vanished. After a while, a series of bizarre symbols begin appearing in the sky above all the world's major cities. Paris, London, New York, Cincinnati. With the appearance of the symbols comes an intense feeling of doom, leading one woman to take her life by jumping off a bridge. This attracts the attention of the Phantom Stranger, who immediately hops on a flight to Israel, bonding with a woman named Lynn Berg along the way. She's meeting with her fiancé, and the two wish to begin working on peace in the region. Unfortunately, as Lynn's fiancé Teddy is picking her up, a man launches a grenade at the vehicle, and Teddy is killed in the resulting explosion. Lynn goes off after the man who threw the bomb and begins beating him to a bloody pulp, causing him to drop another grenade, with Lynn appearing to die in that blast. However, Lynn is really taken to a temple where a man calling himself the Messiah of Evil is holding court. She's to be joined to his new conquering army until the Phantom Stranger shows up to attack him and reveals the Messiah to be none other than Tamarak. Tamarak explains that he was resurrected by the gods of hate in order to assemble an army of the damned. Knowing that hate will only make Tamarak stronger, the stranger centers his emotions and channels enough energy for one final punch. Though he could easily take Tamarak down with just one blow, the stranger decides to show compassion and leave with Lynn. This causes the gods of hate to rethink their priorities and strip Tamarak of his power as the entire facility collapses around him and the stranger gets away with Lynn.
Neither Tala or Tanarak are going to show up for a while as the Phantom Stranger and Dr. 13 go back to having separate adventures.
Jason and Wanda Phillips arrive at Jason's mansion after their wedding. He finally lets her into a previously locked room which contains the casket of his late first wife, Irina. The place is really hers, as Jason falls in love with the older woman despite her heart condition. When she died, the will requested that Jason keep the body with him at all times to inherit her fortune. Though now remarried, Jason continues to be haunted by both Irina and the Phantom Stranger. Wanda repeatedly tells Jason to just get rid of the casket, but it's of little use as both the Stranger and Irina keep popping back up. And it's for a good reason. Because in reality, Jason killed Irina by just managing to stash her nitro pills out of reach and inducing a heart attack to get her fortune.
That revelation is so shocking, I don't even think the dramatic look gopher could possibly express the amount of shocked I am at that twist.
Jason snaps and chases what appears to be Irina's ghost out into the streets where he gets killed by an oncoming vehicle. From there, it's on to the English moors where Dr. 13 has been called in to investigate a series of deaths being blamed on the ghost of a vengeful friar. The friar had apparently been performing dark rituals in the basement of a nearby abbey and had been killing locals at midnight ever since his death. The locals didn't take too kindly to the skeptical doctor's presence, but he manages to reveal that their so-called vengeful ghost friar was really the town historian looking to drum up business. From there, it's on to a government think tank where young Freddie Anson surprises his grandfather at work, which seemingly kills him. This attracts the attention of the Phantom Stranger, and for good reason, as soon many of Freddie's mother's and grandfather's coworkers also begin dying in a similar fashion. No one believes the boy could possibly be responsible until Freddie's father notices something about the boy's cap gun causing some type of electrical energy surge in human beings.
It turns out that Freddy is adopted, and he is actually a descendant of a race of super beings who were augmented by a cosmic storm and then driven underground after they were physically arrested at the age of 4.
Not only that, but the group has gotten in contact with Tala in order to get revenge on the think tank which is conducting underground nuclear testing in the area. The Stranger chases Freddy back underground and orders the tests to come to a stop. Meanwhile, Dr. 13 is in an auction for supposedly cursed items. In particular, it's a grandfather clock with a devil on the pendulum. When the clock is wound properly, the devil appears to come to life and kill whoever wound the clock. When one of his friends is killed, Dr. 13 investigates and discovers that a killer looking for revenge used sulfuric gas to make people think the devil on the pendulum came to life. While struggling with the doctor, the killer traps and stabs himself on his own pitchfork. Now then, we must move on to the Phantom Stranger, who's having a meeting with a man named Broderick who's wishing to speak with him for some time. And by speak with, I mean trap inside an invisible force field. It turns out that Broderick has a severe heart condition and he's hoping to achieve immortality by having the Phantom Stranger's heart transplanted into him.
Because that's how transplants work, apparently?
Though the man's private doctor is unsure, he performs a procedure. It appears to go off without a hitch. However, over the next few weeks, Broderick begins being haunted by the constant presence of the Phantom Stranger, saying that he wants his heart back. Finally, Broderick and his underlings flee to Europe in an isolated castle. It doesn't work, as the next time the Stranger appears, Broderick collapses as if he had never had a heart in his chest to begin with. Moving on to the 13s, they're in the bayou investigating reports of a large swamp creature killing the locals. Of course, it's not the swamp creature that you're thinking of, it's a completely different one. This one turns out to be an eco-terrorist who has developed a foliage gun. He tries to use Dr. 13 as a pawn, but the doctor soon breaks his control thanks to Marie's help and tears down the scientist's headquarters.
We go back to the African nation of Africa as a robotics expert returns to his homeland in order to prevent his local village from being taken over by the military.
And how exactly is that? By building a likeness of the village god Chuma in order to ward off any threats and then teach the villagers how to be self-sustaining. However, it works a little too well as Chuma soon gains sentience and begins falling in love with his creator's fiancée, Aurora. Finally, the Phantom Stranger intervenes, pointing out the hollow nature of both the god and its creator, who are soon both taken out by the now self-reliant villagers. As that plays out, Dr. 13 is called in to investigate a supposedly satanic rock band that is playing a Pied Piper of Hamelin and hypnotizing teenagers in order to lead them into the ocean. It's not really the band's music, but rather a string of magical beans they wind up giving to their concert attendees. The beads are laced with hallucinogen, and yeah, this turns out to just be all about money. Soon, the Phantom Stranger finds himself in New York's famed East Village, where two people are breaking into a wax museum. The curator, an old man in a wheelchair, pops in on the two thugs, appearing to have the upper hand, only for the curator to wind up unharmed a few days later as he finds two other thugs to go find something more valuable to him. As the two goons leave, they walk by his new edition wax figures. The Phantom Stranger intervenes on the goons jumping a random woman in the streets. The trauma of the incident has caused the woman to have amnesia. While she sleeps, the woman dreams about being a queen in ancient Egypt. Upon her awakening, a man named Ernie Draper calls her Dahlia and claims to be her fiancé. However, Ernie soon gets into a struggle with the Phantom Stranger, scaring Dahlia to the point that she storms off into the night, where she is soon grabbed by the two thugs. Realizing what's happened, Ernie and the Phantom Stranger begin working together to track down Dahlia, eventually finding her in the Wax Museum, where the man in the wheelchair explains the truth to them.
Yeah, it turns out that Dahlia was just a wax statue that was infused with the soul of an Egyptian princess. She eventually melts in a fire. Sorry I'm cutting this short, but we're running long enough as it is.
Dr. 13 is called in to investigate the death of a prominent television network executive who claims via his apparent ghost to have been murdered. Dr. 13 goes to visit the late man's wife, eventually turning up that the murder was faked for insurance money. And then, in the ensuing struggle, the wife is accidentally shot and killed. Back in New York City, a man named Mertz encounters the Phantom Stranger while running away from a group of thugs on the subway. The stranger tries to aid Mertz, only for him to suddenly collapse unconscious. He then comes in the apartment of a blind woman named Cassandra Kraft. It turns out Cassandra can sense evil presences in her area. Cassandra and the Phantom Stranger begin working together to track down Mertz, and eventually this leads to an Egyptian archaeological dig. It turns out the man leading the dig is none other than a disguised Tamarack, seeking immortality once more, this time by reviving a phoenix.
I don't know if dying and immediately being reborn necessarily counts as immortality.
Tamarack traps the stranger in a force bubble and intends to use Cassandra in order to revive the phoenix. However, the stranger begins drawing energy from the bird, which causes it to collapse as he breaks free. Tamarack vanishes as part of the bird exploding, and the stranger bids goodbye to Cassandra despite her objections and wanting to be his companion. Instead, he just tells her to wait for the authorities to arrive. From there, it's out to the high seas, where a woman falls off her sailboat after being distracted by the sight of another woman floating on the waves. The Phantom Stranger manages to get the woman named Lorelei back to shore, where she tells her father of the incident. Before anything else can happen, the two are visited by a wayward sea captain named Vanderdecker. Vanderdecker then proceeds to sweep Lorelei off his feet despite her father's objections. When the two plan to run away together, the stranger appears to warn Lorelei's father not to pursue them. It turns out that Hans Verdecker is much older than he claims to be.
Hans was a sailor from the Netherlands who got lost at sea during a massive storm. When he eventually made it back to his homeland, he began to feel that his wife had not been faithful to him and killed her. Now he's doomed to forever roam the oceans and haunt SpongeBob SquarePants because he is the Flying Dutchman.
Mermaid man that.
Lorelei isn't turned off by any of these revelations about Hans and wishes to be with him forever despite her father's objections, so he has no other choice but to stand aside as the couple sails off never to be seen again. Meanwhile, the 13s are visiting a rural farmhouse that claims to have connections to the other side. However, these aren't ghosts, but rather alien beings who can absorb all of the oxygen in a room when teleporting to a planet. The next time the aliens appear, Dr. 13 gets the jump on them, knocks them unconscious, and seals their teleporter packs as a warning to never invade Earth.
So, ghosts and magic are too far-fetched, but aliens are okay, or is that just as long as you can beat them up? Anyway, you remember those giant ice monsters from before? Well, they're back.
It seems the oil drilling in the Arctic Circle has resumed, meaning the ice monsters are up and about again. When an investigation team is sent out, only one member, Tony Blake, returns and he refuses to go back out looking again. Tony explains to his wife Carol what he encountered and believes it's an ecological threat to the planet Earth and that they need to stop drilling for oil. He begs her to join him on his new environmental crusade, and soon the two are harassing oil workers, which attracts the attention of the Phantom Stranger. When a major scuffle breaks out, a massive crevasse opens up and soon everyone is trapped in the chamber of the ice monsters once again. However, it's sudden that the truth is revealed that Tony actually sold humanity out to the ice monsters and wants them to take over again. However, the Phantom Stranger then points out that Tony manipulated the ice monsters as well, so they decide to kill him too and let the others leave. On to the 13s, who are investigating yet another haunting, this time involving an old college chum. The friend recently inherited a large family mansion, and now ghostly howls accusing him of murder are echoing throughout it. But in the end, it turns out these were all just recordings planted by vengeful servants looking for money. In Tibet, a High Lama is at the end of his life and discharges his underlings to find his reincarnation before the Chinese government can appoint a new one. It seems that evidence points towards a newborn in the village of the court's personal musician named Song. Though the Phantom Stranger tries to dissuade the underlings from going to the village, they choose to ignore him and go anyway. That all changes when the chief underling named Kazmit takes a look at the child and believes him to actually be a fake. Kazmit then kills the newborn's mother, who it turns out is also Song's mother. Thankfully, before Kazmit can move on to his younger brother, Song intervenes and grabs the child, fleeing out into the mountainside. Kazma gives pursuit, but is ultimately taken out when a rock slide sends him over a cliff's edge. As repayment for his actions, the underlings agree to take Song in and raise both children in the Lama's court.
Okay, now this is followed by two relatively short stories that don't really feature the Phantom Stranger or Dr. 13, so we're just not going to cover them.
Shortly after being executed for his crimes, a man's body is turned over to a cult who then resurrects him in order to assassinate a Middle Eastern holy leader named Chandru. The Phantom Stranger thwarts the attempted assassination, which gets him into Chandru's good graces. So the killer in question begins taking a new motive by working through Chandru's daughter, Indria. Not knowing his true identity, Indria goes on a date with the hired killer and winds up getting taken hostage. However, it's then that the Phantom Stranger intervenes once more, pointing out that all of this has turned the killer into a monstrous demon. Angered by his new appearance, the killer goes after a cult and kills them instead. Moving on to the 13s, they're in Greece, or is it Greece 2, investigating a Medusa statue that seems to have the stone-turning power of the mythological Gorgon. In reality, it's actually just a group of locals who still believe in the Greek pantheon of gods, which Medusa isn't actually a part of, and are actually freezing people via a special sodium additive that gives them a stone-like appearance.
And that concludes DC Showcase Presents Volume 1 of The Phantom Stranger. How was it? Well, I do think the artwork is really darn good throughout all these stories. I think it's really solid. Even though it's several various artists, it all has a very good ethereal feeling to it, and, you know, it can get kind of creepy sometimes. Also, I'd say most of the characterization is spot on. I mean, I like a lot of the times that in Dr. 13's solo stories, he is actually right. Like I said, he's not so much a villain to the Phantom Stranger as he is more of an antagonistic foil, the voice against his, that can also sometimes be just as credible. I do like that about him. And that being said, unfortunately, that's where the compliments really do end. I think the book in itself is just a little too unfocused. I mean, does it want to be an anthology series? Does it just want to tell stories about the Phantom Stranger and Dr. 13? Or is it them telling their own stories? And it's just a lot of unnecessary padding that just kind of ruins the pacing a lot. I don't really recommend this for binge reading. Like, maybe if you read 1 or 2 issues at a time, it'd be fine. But when you're trying to mow through 4 or 5 of these at a clip, it just really doesn't work. And that's also not bolstered by the fact that the supporting cast is, well, just really kind of dull and uninspired. I mean, we've got the Dime Store Scooby Gang, we've got Tanarak and Tala, they're just really boring. Dr. 13's wife really isn't interesting at all. I mean, she's in a bunch of these stories, but I can't really tell you anything about her, so yeah, unfortunately, it's just kind of disappointing all around. Not to mention, this book is long out of print. There is an omnibus volume out there that reprints these things in full color, and it's in hardcover, so it's a little bit more expensive. So if you are going to try to track it down, it's probably going to cost you a lot of money unless you're doing something digitally. Then maybe it's a little different, but yeah, it's kind of hard to really fully recommend any of these things because it's really kind of flat. I'm sorry. I am going to give DC Showcase Presents The Phantom Stranger Volume 1 a D. And with that, let's see what we're doing next time on the Random Trade Review.
Remember, you can help support my channel at patreon.com/sleepytimeforcatproductions. There, you can request a trade to be put in the randomizer, aka the cardboard box. Also, remember, like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring that notification bell.